So one of the big questions that we try to figure out down here in the factor market is very similar to what we just did with utility, where utility we looked and tried to figure out how much individuals or households should purchase of a particular product to maximize their utility. Here we want to figure out and think about what the firm should do as far as producing or purchasing rather their land, labor, and capital. So if you go to your next slide, you see this. We're going to make this thing called the production function. And the question is how many workers to hire. Again, I could say how many machines to purchase or how many acres of land to purchase. But workers is something that I think kids or students have an easier time handling. So I'm going to talk to you about what we would be doing in class if we were in class right now. And what I would do is I would ask for a volunteer that could come up and make paper airplanes. Now there'd be some rules about this paper airplane making. Have to make one paper airplane at a time. When the paper airplane is finished, the paper airplane must be placed on the desk that they are working on. There is one desk at the front of the classroom that all work must be completed upon. There is a stack of paper up there, and the students cannot remove that paper from the desk. It has to stay there with the completed paper airplanes. Any paper airplane that falls off the desk, it burns up immediately and is not counted. Okay? And so what happens is I get the first Joe Schmo up there, and they normally do pretty good. Let's say for the sake of just exercise here, let's say they make 5 paper airplanes. It's worth noting that I give them 1 minute. 1 minute. Okay? The first one, they make 1 airplane. And then, the second, I have a second worker come up. I let them hire another worker. And sometimes they make exactly double. They go to 10. Sometimes they figure stuff out and they work together pretty well, and even they jump up to 14, whatever. But I'm just going to say for the sake of this exercise that they get together, and the first person made 5 together. When there's 2 of them, they make 9. Let's say 9. Okay. Now, some of you who are astute may have noticed something right away, but we'll come back to that. Now, I give them a chance. They get a third person. Now, third person, normally things get a little interesting because third person, some things happen here. So let's say they made 9 before. Let's say with 3 people, say they make 12. All right. Now, somebody that's real sharp might be noticing something. Well, what's happening to the number of paper airplanes they're making? It's going up, right? Yeah, it is. It's definitely increasing. So the total production of these 3 workers is definitely increasing. But what else is happening here? Anybody notice? So the first person made 5, second 9. Here, I'll even write it in. 5, 9, 12. The next person, when we hire 4 people, then we go, let's say we just end up at 14. Anybody know what's happening here? What the problem is? We are increasing, but what happens to our jump every time? It's not getting as big, right? And now I'm using a contrived example, and so some of you might be saying, "Oh, Mr. Sutton, that's ridiculous." But think about why this might be happening. Why is it? Now I filled in for the 5th and 6th worker. We just went 15, and then we've got 15 exactly with our 6th worker. Why the heck would this happen? Well, consider what occurs. So remember, I told you all the paper airplanes have to stay on the desk once they're finished. All workers have to work at the one desk. Think about what's happening now. If there are 6 people up front, how many people can you fit around one classroom desk? Like one of your student desks. 6 people is a lot of people around one desk, right? And if everybody's reaching for papers, what might happen? Somebody knocks a paper airplane off. Okay, yeah, you've got 6 people up there making paper airplanes, but now you've got 12 hands that could knock the paper off, and that paper burns up. Other thing that happens with 6 people, what do they start doing? They start chit-chatting. Same thing happens at work, right? You hire a bunch of people, next thing you know, everybody's hanging around the water cooler having a conversation, not manning their machines, not making their products, but chit-chatting instead. So this is an interesting illustration here, because if we start here and we draw the line, yeah, it's a generally upward sloping line, but it's mellowing the whole way. Ah, there it is. Okay? And if you want a better look at what this production function looks like, this is it. Okay? I know the numbers are different here and the quantity of apple pickers is different, but for the most part, this is the illustration here. Now, hang on one second for me. So now some of you might be saying, wait a second, Mr. Sutton, like sometimes businesses, they hire people, you know, like think of, some of you go, if you're from APUS and you're real astute, you might go, well, you know, Henry Ford hired a bunch of workers at his factory and like increased productivity. And he absolutely did, because what was true about each worker? They had a very specific job, right? There were no excess workers, so he hired workers and actually increased his productivity with each person they hired. So his production function might look more like this, right? But, so if you see, I made the production function get steeper, 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 until about like here, and then it kind of starts to mellow out. So you'll notice if you took it from this dot upwards, it looks like the one that I did here. So yes, it could increase initially, but then it's going to get to some point like this, all right, where we see the extra output that comes from another worker or making it buying another machine start to diminish. And if you're confused as how this might work with a machine, think about what we're doing. If you buy, say you have 10 workers, but you have 100 machines, you can't utilize those machines, right? Having that 100th machine, there's no worker to man it to produce anything. So once you start purchasing that 100th machine out here, you're not getting very much productivity. So you'll notice that this is the total quantity. I don't know why I choose to write this out. I should just type it. So this is your total. What's this space here? Does anybody know? What's this space called? When we go from 1 unit to 2 units, 2 units to 3, 3 to 4. What's that little space, that jump there that I'm showing you? What is that? That's your marginal output. Or you'll hear it called marginal physical product in a second. So that's the jump for each additional apple picker or machine, or acre of land. This is the extra unit that the extra production that comes from that additional unit. Now notice, for my example here, I kept all of the other inputs, the other factors of production constant, right? So this is worthwhile to write down. So as I was saying, or trying to get written down here, I kept the only input that I added was I gave you more workers. I didn't change the number of desks. I didn't give you any more time. I didn't teach you how to make the airplanes any better. Everything else stayed the same. I only changed one input. Now, the same could have been true if I kept the number of workers the same, but I gave you more and more paper. Like, at some point, you weren't going to get very much out of having extra paper. So, now, this is a concept here where you notice that each additional unit produced less and less output. Well, this is what we call the law of diminishing marginal returns. Similar to the idea of the law of diminishing marginal utility, but here we're going to talk about the amount of output that we get. And I'm going to write it in so you guys don't have to watch me struggle along with it. So here it is in layman's terms, or kind of associated with the example that I gave you from class. So as our number of workers increases, and notice again without any increase in other resources, the output from each additional worker decreases or diminishes, hence the law of diminishing marginal returns. So if you look at this graph here, we have increasing marginal returns here as each unit, our quantity of grape pickers or whatever, and this is our number of grapes picked. I'm sorry, I messed that up. But it's increasing here, but then it starts to slow down. So this point right here is where the law of diminishing marginal returns sets in. Okay, and sometimes you get a graph like this, and you have to identify that point there. Notice the way that they kind of can word this a little bit different. This worker is an input, right? So they could say as number of inputs increases without an increase in other resources or other inputs, the output from each additional input decreases. So I put the workers in there just to help you kind of contextualize a little bit, but understand that a worker is in fact an input, and what they produce is an output. Okay.